The shocking differences between Catherine, the Princess of Wales, and Meghan Markle have just been exposed in glorious.
For years, Meghan Markle presented herself as a woman who had escaped an unforgiving institution and reclaimed control of her own story. But behind the polished speeches, carefully timed appearances, and declarations of independence, a dangerous question was growing louder. What if the public was no longer convinced? The change did not happen in one explosive moment. There was no single scandal powerful enough to break the image she had spent years building. Instead, trust appeared to weaken slowly, almost invisibly. A doubtful headline here. A delayed announcement there. A once supportive voice suddenly going quiet. Each moment seemed small on its own, but together they began forming something far more dangerous. A pattern. After stepping away from royal duties, Meghan was no longer simply a duchess living outside palace walls. She had become the central author of her own public identity. Her influence depended on people believing that she had escaped control, survived betrayal, and emerged stronger. Every interview had to reinforce that message. Every speech had to prove her courage. Every business venture carried the weight of showing that leaving the monarchy had been liberation, not a devastating miscalculation. That pressure was relentless. A charity announcement could no longer be just an act of service. It became evidence of purpose. A public appearance was not merely an appearance. It was a test of relevance. A new project was expected to succeed before it had even begun, because failure would invite the question Meghan could least afford to hear: had the royal connection been the source of her power all along? Then the whispers started. Media insiders allegedly questioned whether the excitement surrounding Meghan still matched her real influence. Royal observers noticed that the palace no longer seemed interested in answering her claims. In Hollywood, people who once appeared eager to stand beside her reportedly became harder to see, harder to quote, and far less willing to defend her. Buckingham Palace did not need to strike back. Silence did the work. Ceremonies continued. Titles remained. Traditions carried on without explanation. The monarchy allowed time to create distance, and that distance slowly challenged Meghan's version of who had truly moved forward. Harry remained beside her, protective and defiant. Yet his position carried its own contradiction. He had rejected royal life, but his royal identity still powered much of their global attention. The more he defended Meghan from the institution, the more their relevance seemed tied to it. And now the newest threat was approaching from somewhere more unexpected. Not from hostile tabloids, not from palace courtiers, but from the circles Meghan had believed would welcome her without conditions. Someone had changed their position. Some private disappointment had altered the mood, and former supporters were no longer rushing to her side. And as the public debate intensified, the first sign of real danger did not come from Buckingham Palace, it came from the very world Meghan had once believed would become her new kingdom. When Meghan returned to California, Hollywood seemed like the perfect stage for her reinvention: wealth, influence, powerful friendships, and freedom from palace rules. Yet the invitations that once appeared guaranteed began carrying conditions. The applause sounded less certain, and behind closed doors, enthusiasm was quietly turning into hesitation. At first, the possibilities seemed endless. Meghan and Harry had not simply left royal life, they appeared to have transformed themselves into something even more powerful. Global figures free from protocol, ceremony, and palace control. Their names carried instant attention. Their story attracted executives, celebrities, producers, campaigners, and influential friends who believed the couple could turn royal fame into entertainment power, political influence, luxury branding, and cultural authority. The early excitement was intense. Prestigious deals arrived. Interviews became global events. Public appearances were treated like major announcements. Their departure from Britain had not made them less interesting. For a time, it made them impossible to ignore. But excitement is not the same as loyalty. Hollywood may celebrate reinvention, but it demands results. Behind the glamour stood contracts, deadlines, audiences, investors, and expectations. Executives did not only want access to royal memories, they wanted strong ideas, reliable partnerships, successful content, and projects capable of surviving without another explosive chapter about the monarchy. That was where the mood allegedly began to change. Delays created questions. Shifting plans caused frustration. Creative disagreements were whispered about in rooms Meghan could not control. Some believed she wanted complete authority over every detail while still expecting the protection and special treatment once attached to royal life. The very control that had made her feel safe could now be interpreted as difficult, demanding, or impossible to satisfy. And celebrity friendship offered little security. In Hollywood, relationships could appear deeply personal while remaining dangerously transactional. Powerful people were drawn to attention, influence, and opportunity. But when association with Meghan and Harry began carrying controversy, public risk, or endless questions about royal conflict, some, reportedly, stepped back. There was no dramatic betrayal, no public declaration. The rejection was quieter than that. Messages took longer to answer. Meetings were postponed. Invitations disappeared. Public praise became careful, polished, and distant, warm enough to avoid hostility, but never strong enough to signal real loyalty. For Meghan, the contradiction was brutal. She had escaped one rigid hierarchy only to enter another. Hollywood had no crowns, but it had ranks. Its rules were governed by profitability, relevance, private loyalty, and the ability to remain desirable. Then came the disappointment that seemed to confirm her deepest fear. Her royal connection could still open doors. But once she entered the room, her reputation alone might no longer be powerful enough to keep them open. But the cooling mood in Hollywood was only part of the crisis, because another problem was emerging, one created by Meghan and Harry's own accounts of royal life and the contradictions audiences believed they could no longer ignore. Every revelation had once seemed explosive. Every interview promised another hidden truth from behind palace walls. But as the stories accumulated, audiences began comparing dates, memories, motives, and emotional claims, and what once looked like a powerful testimony slowly became a maze of contradictions that threatened to swallow everything. After leaving royal life, Meghan and Harry built much of their new identity around telling the world what had happened inside the monarchy. Their private pain became the foundation of interviews, documentaries, memoirs, speeches, and public campaigns. At first, the disclosures carried enormous force. They appeared to expose loneliness behind privilege, cruelty beneath ceremony, and the emotional cost of serving an institution that demanded silence even when family relationships were breaking apart. The sympathy was immediate because the story felt deeply human. Meghan described isolation. Harry spoke of fear, anger, and the haunting belief that history was repeating itself. Together, they presented themselves as two people who had chosen survival over obedience. But every retelling created another risk. The more details they shared, the more material audiences had to compare. Small differences in wording began attracting attention. Timelines were examined. Responsibilities appeared to shift. What had once sounded clear became harder to follow as critics placed one account beside another and searched for inconsistencies. Soon, a new question emerged. Were Meghan and Harry revealing these experiences to find closure, or were they keeping the conflict alive because royal revelations remained their strongest source of public attention? Their supporters rejected that suspicion. They argued that trauma is not remembered like a perfect record. Pain can blur dates, change emphasis, and make the same experience feel different years later. To them, minor inconsistencies did not erase the emotional truth of what Meghan had endured. Yet the opposing view was growing louder. Critics claimed Meghan adjusted her story depending on the audience. In one moment, she appeared vulnerable. In another, defiant, sometimes she spoke of reconciliation. At other times, the distance seemed permanent. Each version could be explained, but together they fed the belief that the message was being carefully shaped. Harry reinforced her account, but his own emotions revealed a deeper struggle. He criticized King Charles, Prince William, Catherine, and the institution itself, yet traces of loyalty remained. He still wanted recognition from the family he condemned. That contradiction made every statement more complicated. Meanwhile, the palace said almost nothing. Its restraint became a weapon. Each time the Sussexes explained themselves, the monarchy appeared calm, while Meghan and Harry seemed trapped in an endless cycle of defense. Then a new controversy began to form, one involving a promise, a professional relationship, and an initiative that did not unfold as expected. Suddenly, every old doubt returned. Then came the incident that transformed quiet skepticism into something far more damaging, because this time, the criticism was not only about the royal family or Meghan's past. It was about whether anyone could still trust what she promised next. Meghan believed the next chapter would change the conversation. It would be elegant, independent, commercially powerful, and impossible to dismiss as another royal grievance. Yet before the project could establish her comeback, questions surrounding its purpose, timing, partnerships, and authenticity began threatening to turn her greatest reinvention into another public reckoning. This was supposed to be the moment Meghan finally stepped beyond the palace. No more endless arguments over titles, protocol, interviews, or family betrayal. The new venture would present her as a creator, entrepreneur, and cultural figure in her own right. A woman building something lasting from personal taste, ambition, empowerment, and carefully chosen values. But that was precisely why the stakes were so high. This was not merely another announcement. It was meant to prove that Meghan could succeed without depending on fresh royal revelations. If the project flourished, it could silence critics who claimed her influence existed only because of the family she had left behind. If it failed, however, the consequences would reach far beyond business. The anticipation was carefully built. Public hints appeared. Private previews reached selected names. Celebrity connections created intrigue. Strategic reports suggested that something polished and powerful was coming. Yet the attention arrived before the project appeared ready to withstand it. Questions followed quickly. What exactly was being launched? What would be sold? When would it become available? Why did the direction seem to shift? Reports of delayed plans, unclear products, legal complications, staffing uncertainty, and changing strategies began to surround the venture. What might have been ordinary difficulties for another new business became something far more damaging for Meghan. Critics treated every imperfection as evidence. A delay was not simply a delay. It was presented as proof of poor planning. A revised idea became a sign of confusion. A carefully controlled announcement was described as style without substance. Once again, Meghan's greatest strength, her instinct for presentation, was turned against her. Behind the scenes, advisors were allegedly caught between two impossible demands. They had to meet Meghan's exact standards, while also creating something commercially realistic, timely, and clear enough for the public to understand. The glamorous promise remained, but whispers of frustration began to weaken it. For Meghan, the emotional blow was severe. The project had been designed to restore control. Instead, outsiders were once again defining her motives before she could fully explain them. Harry tried to stand beside her, but his continuing battles with the monarchy created another problem. Every dispute involving his family pulled attention away from Meghan's work and back toward the royal conflict they were trying to escape. Then the criticism changed. A respected industry voice, once seen as sympathetic, allegedly questioned whether the venture had real substance. Suddenly, scattered doubts became a mainstream judgment. And this was still not the worst of it. And when that connection was finally made, the damage spread far beyond one delayed project, because Meghan was no longer being judged on whether the venture would succeed, but on what its difficulties appeared to reveal about her. The latest blow was not a single headline, failed launch, or cold royal response. It was the sudden merging of every previous criticism into one devastating public conclusion that Meghan's greatest problem was no longer the palace, the press, or hostile commentators. It was the growing belief that the pattern always ended the same way. An ambitious announcement would create excitement. Questions would follow. Delays would appear. Tensions would be whispered about. Then, as disappointment grew, responsibility would seem to move elsewhere. To Meghan's critics, the latest setback was no longer an isolated difficulty. It revived a damaging narrative they believed they had seen before. That was when the conversation changed. Separate controversies began connecting in the public imagination. Professional partnerships, strained family relationships, abandoned plans, disputed recollections, and carefully managed appearances were pulled together into one story. Whether that story was fair no longer seemed to matter. Once people believed they could see a pattern, every new problem appeared to confirm it. The criticism became more personal. Commentators were no longer questioning only Meghan's strategy. They were questioning her reliability, temperament, authenticity, and ability to maintain lasting alliances. The debate moved from what she had done to who people believed she was. And the silence around her became impossible to ignore. Former employees, industry contacts, public figures, and past supporters were reportedly reluctant to enter the argument. Some may have feared that defending Meghan would drag them into another exhausting cycle of accusations, denials, and public scrutiny. Prominent friends who had once praised her openly offered little visible support as the pressure intensified. That absence carried its own message. Social media made the damage faster and harsher. Old interviews returned. Previous ventures were compared with current promises. Staff departures, family tensions, disputed claims, and uncomfortable public moments were edited into a single narrative of decline. Years of controversy were compressed into seconds, repeated until speculation began sounding like established truth. Meghan's defenders fought back fiercely. They argued that she was judged by standards no one else was expected to meet. Every delay became a scandal. Every change of plan became evidence of failure. They pointed to racism, sexism, class prejudice, and resentment toward a woman who had refused to remain under royal control. But Meghan faced a brutal choice. If she responded aggressively, she risked extending the controversy. If she remained silent, hostile interpretations could harden into public belief. Harry watched another wave of judgment strike his wife, deepening his anger and strengthening his desire to protect their family. Yet every intervention carried danger. His loyalty could be presented as proof that Meghan turned criticism into a battle against institutions, enemies, and betrayal. That was why it kept getting worse. Meghan was no longer launching anything into neutral ground. Every reinvention entered an atmosphere already filled with suspicion. A reputation does not collapse when critics become louder. It collapses when former supporters stop arguing back. Yet while Meghan faced the consequences of a narrative she could no longer fully control, the royal family was quietly strengthening the contrast, and one carefully managed display of unity made her isolation appear more severe than ever. Buckingham Palace did not need to release a statement. King Charles did not need to condemn anyone, and Prince William did not need to answer another accusation. The institution simply continued. Ceremonies unfolded, loyalties were displayed, and through its disciplined silence, the monarchy delivered a response more devastating than words. The strategy was simple, but powerful. While Meghan and Harry remained surrounded by arguments over reputation, broken trust, and unfinished business, the royal family projected continuity. Public duties continued. Charitable work moved forward. Family appearances were carefully managed. The message was never spoken, yet it was impossible to miss. The Crown would not allow one private conflict to interrupt the institution. For King Charles, that silence carried a painful cost. Harry was not merely a former working royal. He was his son. Private concern could still exist beneath public distance. But Charles also carried a duty larger than fatherhood. Reconciliation might have been emotionally desirable, yet any return without firm boundaries risked bringing fresh disruption into the heart of the monarchy. Prince William was believed to see the problem even more sharply. Trust, once broken, could not be restored through one conversation or a private promise. In his view, Harry and Meghan would need to prove discretion over time. Without that proof, royal intimacy was not simply risky, it was almost impossible. Catherine represented another unspoken contrast. Her composure, discipline, and place within the institution reflected the life Meghan had walked away from. Catherine did not need to mention the Sussexes. Her presence alone invited comparison between steady service and constant reinvention. Then there was Queen Camilla. Once judged as an outsider at the center of royal scandal, she had spent decades rebuilding her position through patience, duty, and silence. Her rise revealed something the palace understood deeply. Reputation could be repaired, but rarely through one interview, one launch, or one dramatic declaration. It was rebuilt slowly, through consistency. That lesson stood in sharp contrast to Meghan's faster cycle of reinvention. The palace communicated its boundaries through detail. Invitations were limited. Seating arrangements carried meaning. Family photographs showed who remained inside the circle. Ceremonial roles, security decisions, and official acknowledgments said what no statement ever would. To Meghan, this silence could feel calculated and cruel. She might believe the institution allowed damaging stories to spread while refusing to correct them. Yet from the palace's perspective, answering every accusation would drag the crown into a celebrity battle and create another opening for private matters to become public. The restraint placed Harry under unbearable pressure. Every failed effort to reconnect pushed him further from the family, traditions, and identity that had shaped his entire life. And as the palace closed ranks, the strain inside the Sussex marriage became impossible to separate from the public battle. Because Harry was being pulled between the woman he had vowed to protect and the family he had never fully stopped needing. Harry had sacrificed status, duty, friendships, and much of his royal identity in the belief that protecting Meghan was worth any cost. But as another reputational crisis unfolded, an agonizing question surfaced. What happens when loyalty demands constant war? Yet every new battle takes him further from the life he still mourns. For Harry, criticism of Meghan was never merely public commentary. It touched the deepest wound of his life. The memory of Princess Diana, the power of the press, and the fear that history could repeat itself had shaped the way he saw every attack. To others, a headline might have looked cruel. To Harry, it could feel like a warning. That made him Meghan's emotional shield. Defending her became more than an act of love. It became Harry's attempt to confront the past, challenge the institution that had raised him, and prove that he could protect his wife where he believed others had failed his mother. Every public statement carried that history. Every legal fight, interview, and accusation became part of a battle much older than his marriage. But protection came with a terrible cost. Royal milestones continued without him. Family gatherings took place at a distance. King Charles and Prince William moved forward inside a world Harry once understood completely, while he remained outside it, watching the traditions of his childhood continue without his presence. His children, too, were growing up far from much of their extended family. surrounded by questions they might one day demand answers to. Harry still appeared to want reconciliation. Yet Meghan's need for safety pulled in the opposite direction. How could he rebuild trust with people she believed had allowed lasting harm? And how could she accept his return to an institution she had fought so hard to escape? Every possible visit to Britain carried danger. Security had to be considered. Protocol could become humiliation. Press attention might turn any private moment into spectacle. Family members could fear that confidential conversations would later be revealed. Even a gesture of peace risked creating another crisis. Meanwhile, critics increasingly portrayed Harry not as an independent prince, but as a supporting figure in Meghan's ambitions. That perception weakened his standing and made him less able to serve as a bridge between two sides that barely trusted one another. For Meghan, the contradiction was equally painful. Harry's royal grievances kept drawing attention back to the monarchy, overshadowing her attempts to build a future in America. She wanted to escape the Duchess identity, yet its influence remained central to the doors still open to them. Speculation about strain grew easily. Separate appearances, divided professional projects, or a tired expression could be treated as proof of private conflict, even when no proof existed. Together, Meghan and Harry appeared determined to survive. But unity could only protect them from collapse. It could not automatically restore trust. With the palace distant, Hollywood uncertain, and public trust dangerously fragile, Meghan reached the point where image management was no longer enough. Only a decisive change could stop the damage from defining her permanently. Meghan Markle has survived rejection, family conflict, royal pressure, global ridicule, and relentless scrutiny. But survival is not the same as recovery. As the latest controversy settles into public memory, she now faces the most important decision of her post-royal life: fight harder, disappear, or finally, change the strategy. This crisis cut deeper because the criticism no longer came from one predictable corner. Royal watchers questioned her judgment. Entertainment insiders doubted her influence. Business observers challenged her execution. Former supporters appeared less willing to defend her, while sections of the public began treating every setback as confirmation of a pattern they already believed. And yet, Meghan was far from powerless. She still possessed global recognition, a devoted audience, powerful connections, commercial potential, and a personal story that continued to fascinate millions. Few public figures could command attention so quickly. Few could turn one appearance into days of debate. But those advantages had become dangerous. Every project was treated as a major cultural test. Every delay became international news. Every change of direction looked like retreat. Fame gave Meghan reach, but it also denied her the freedom to fail quietly. Three paths now stood before her. She could step back and focus on tangible work, allowing consistency to rebuild what publicity could not. She could launch another forceful media campaign, challenge her critics directly, and attempt to reclaim the narrative through confrontation. Or she could pursue the most emotionally difficult option of all, a cautious repair of relations with the royal family. That path would demand sacrifice. The palace would likely expect strict boundaries, private conversations, and patience without immediate recognition. Meghan might have to surrender control over parts of the story and rebuild trust without telling the world she was doing it. But retreat may feel impossible to her. She could see every attack as proof that the same forces she believed targeted her inside the monarchy were still trying to punish her outside it. From that perspective, silence would not be wisdom. It would feel like surrender. There lies the deeper tragedy. Meghan fought to own her identity, yet her image remains shaped by people she distrusts, an institution she rejected, and disputes she cannot fully escape. Harry still stands beside her, but he faces his own reckoning over family, legacy, fatherhood, and whether permanent distance from royal life has truly delivered the freedom he once imagined. The final judgment has not been written. Meghan's next move could begin a genuine recovery, or it could confirm every damaging narrative now surrounding her. Because in the world of royalty, reputation is not destroyed in one dramatic moment, it is weakened by every unanswered question, every broken alliance, and every attempt to escape a past that refuses to let go.